Hello, and welcome to Biofilm News, your source for latest news in the world of healthcare, pharmaceutical industry, biotech, and life science research. My name is Pavel Rozhov. Please consider subscribing and letting other people know about this channel. Today, I would like to share 5 news stories that I found interesting and worth sharing that are related to COVID-19 but might have escaped your attention. Links to individual stories are provided in the description below. Let's get started. So the first story that I came across today actually deals with the supply of the critical drugs during the COVID-19 pandemic. And this comes courtesy of the University of Minnesota website. So basically in this story, they find that there is a number of life-saving drugs that are experiencing or will experience shortages in the United States. And they've identified 156 critical drugs that are required for acute care within a few hours or days. And as a result of this critical shortages, basically patients may experience increased fatalities or big problems in terms of their health. The reason why there are shortages of these drugs is because most of those key pharmaceutical ingredients are produced in countries such as China, India, and Italy, which have been struck by this pandemic. And obviously, the manufacturing has been halted or otherwise severely impacted by this crisis. So it will be important to keep track of this news as it develops over the next 90 days. And because essentially this is a question of life and death, because a lot of patients in the United States actually rely on those medicines for their health care. And it is important to deliver those medications to them in a timely manner. The second story that I came across today actually has to do with the recent report from Fierce Healthcare about the boom of funding for the telemedicine companies. And basically, it has been reported that in the first quarter of 2020, the venture capital funding for telemedicine companies has surged to a whopping $788 million. This is obviously is super interesting because of the situation that we are dealing with right now, where companies that are providing these telemedicine services are experiencing surges in demand from a number of healthcare providers. And naturally, the funding for these companies, some of them are startups and small businesses, are experiencing these phenomenal runs of funding that are important to sustain and grow their businesses, especially in the conditions of self-isolation and quarantine at home. Despite the surge in this funding, the amount of the available money that these companies would be able to raise will naturally decrease, because the venture capital firms would be much more selective when it comes to who they want to invest in, which may not be such a bad idea. In addition to that, I've also seen that it's definitely important to keep track of these emerging technologies, and the pandemic that we currently experience would have a significant impact on the adoption of those different techniques and tools that are becoming available. And it will obviously have a direct impact on the types of funds that will be allocated to these companies as compared to the companies with other types of business models. The third bit of news that I came across today is actually quite interesting and I would say disturbing, and it comes from NBC News, talking about America's rats. Due to the closure of a number of bars and restaurants, there are unintended consequences specifically for rats, which are experiencing shortages of food. And basically, because of the fact that in places such as New York, so many restaurants are now closed, the rats that live next to that restaurant suddenly have their food shortages, and they only have a couple of available options, and they include cannibalism, rat battles, and infanticide. And if you think about it, this is very scary and possibly quite dangerous, because the result of closing these businesses has a direct impact on ecosystem that is essentially is maintained by those places. And if you essentially change how this ecosystem works by cutting the food supply from those rats, for example, they would resort to things like killing their young in the nest and cannibalizing their pups, or basically creating this very dire situation from the ecological standpoint, because cannibalism and shortages of food is something that nobody wants to experience, and they may have unintended epidemiological consequences as well. So this is a developing story and something that we should keep an eye on. The fourth story that I came across today has to do with the clinical trial disruption because of this coronavirus pandemic, and it comes to us courtesy of Biofilm. Basically, this story will be updated regularly as more and more information will be available. And it essentially deals with companies that had to halt or otherwise experience disruptions in running these healthcare trials. Because essentially, this is such a huge public health issue. When something like 6 companies originally reported that some type of disruption in their clinical trial operations, because that means availability of new and exciting and promising medicines will be prolonged as a result of this pandemic. So I would encourage you to keep an eye out for the types of clinical trials that are being run, that are being disrupted and directly affected by this pandemic. And this is something that we should pay attention to when we talk about resuming the operations across the industries, including in hospitals, and re-enrollment of patients and things like that. And to finish off, the final story that I wanted to share is actually quite interesting from the scientific point of view, and a bit of an uplifting story in my opinion. And it deals with the report from New York Times as well as many other sources talking about the effect that stay-at-home orders and shelters and quarantines on the seismographic activity across the world. Now, as a result of people staying home, the Earth seems to be experiencing less movement, and as a result, there is barely any activity on those seismograms that would be otherwise quite active, as is evident from the graph that you see over here. And basically, it seems that we put a pause on the world, and it has a direct effect on how the Earth reacts. Earth crust is behaving, and it allows scientists across the world actually to take this new bit of data and new bit of knowledge and use this in their research and actually apply it to understanding the earthquake activity on this very nuanced way. And basically, this is something that I think we should all consider when we talk about this pandemic, what kind of opportunities it presents to us, whether it would be understanding our planet a little bit more, whether it will be effects on a climate change and the ecosystems that we are surrounded with constantly. So this was a very interesting article, and I encourage you to read about specific examples, how different scientists across the world are monitoring this type of activity. So with this, I'd like to say thank you very much for watching my YouTube channel. I really appreciate your support. I am also going to be doing a Biofilm News podcast series with different guest speakers, so keep an eye out for that. And thank you for watching. Please subscribe to my channel, and I'll look forward to speaking and seeing you again. Bye-bye.